Good morning, everyone. When I was a kid, I played games for fun. I grew up on games where the goal was to explore, to build, and to figure things out. You paid once, or maybe you got the cartridge as a birthday gift, and that was it. There were no ads, no pop-ups asking me to spend $4.99 on a new level, and no scary timers. Games were designed to entertain and not to extract. But that's changed. Because today, when a child opens a game through a mobile or tablet, they're not just playing, but they're being nudged to follow things in game that emotionally manipulate them into staying longer, clicking more, and buying things they don't understand. The games kids play nowadays are not like the games we grew up in. They're engineered systems optimized for engagement and profit at the expense of a child's well-being. In Canada, nearly 40% of children aged 2 to 6 and almost half of kids aged 7 to 11 are using mobile phones every month. The most common use of these mobile phones is to play games found through the app stores. These apps are often free to download, but over 90% of top-rated kids apps in app stores today include some form of advertising, and a majority of these apps have at least one deceptive feature. And I'm not just talking about banner ads. These apps are full of design tricks, persistent game-interrupting pop-ups that are difficult to get rid of, fake timers that give you a false sense of urgency to act on something and to act on it fast, characters who cry and guilt trip you to purchases and ad watches, and reward systems that flash, blink, and nudge kids toward repeated logins, ad watching, and spending. This is deceptive design. And these apps are designed to monetize children's attention and emotional response for money. They work because they're exploiting children's vulnerabilities, their trust, their poor impulse control, and their limited ability to recognize when they're being marketed to. Children under 12 can't reliably tell the difference between advertising and entertainment, and kids of all ages struggle with impulse control and emotional regulation, especially when they're in a high stimulation environment like a mobile game. Parents are reporting surprise bills, screen time fights, and kids obsessed with earning rewards through ads or purchases. And studies link this kind of design to rising anxiety, attention problems, and skewed consumer habits in young children. So this isn't just about money, it's about the kind of digital environment we're allowing our kids to grow up in. Other countries have recognized this developmental vulnerability and have acted accordingly. So let's compare Canada to other countries. The UK has a children's code. It makes it illegal to use persuasive design that isn't in a child's best interest. And the US has a Children's Online Privacy Protection Act enforced by the Federal Trade Commission and has issued major fines for misleading design in the past. The EU bans direct marketing prompts to kids like, ask your mom to buy this. But in Canada, there is no national legislation that prohibits manipulative in-game advertising that targets children. The only exception is Quebec, which has a solid child advertising ban, but it's almost impossible to enforce across mobile platforms. We need to ensure that whatever approach we can have can accomplish a few goals. First, we need to recognize that children, especially those under 13, have limited cognitive capacity to understand advertising, to understand manipulation or persuasive design. Current efforts don't account for developmental vulnerabilities, which leaves children unprotected from deceptive design. We also need to establish a clear definition of deceptive digital marketing tactics that exploit children. Without specific language in our efforts, current practices will remain unregulated even when they cause harm. And lastly, we need to lay foundation for long-term systemic reform. Enforceable standards that can adapt to emerging risks will avoid partial, inconsistent, and reactive efforts. This strategy is what I like to call the game changer. It is a three-phase strategy that can effectively protect children from deceptive design. Phase 1 amends the Competition Act to specifically and explicitly define deceptive digital marketing practices that target children, tactics like fake timers, emotional coercion, and pay-to-play trickery. And this gives the Competition Bureau immediate authority to investigate and penalize. And it's the quickest and clearest first step, and it's legally doable within a year. The Competition Act is Canada's main law against misleading marketing, but it wasn't built with children in mind. Right now, the Act uses a reasonable consumer test, which assumes adult awareness, impulse control, and critical thinking. But kids don't have those cognitive tools, at least not yet, and they can't always distinguish between gameplay and advertising. They're uniquely vulnerable to tactics like fake urgency, emotional nudges, and disguised purchases. And so by amending this act, we can define these digital dark patterns and we can classify them as reviewable conduct when specifically directed at children. We wouldn't be building a new law here, we would be updating an existing one to reflect the reality of how manipulation works in the digital economy. And crucially, it's going to allow the Competition Bureau to investigate and to warn and to penalize just like they do for misleading adult ads. Phase 2 expands on the Digital Regulators Forum. And instead of creating another bureaucracy, we propose extending the mandate of an institution that already exists. And so this forum already brings together Canada's key digital regulators, so the Competition Bureau, the Privacy Commissioner, and the Canadian Radio, Television, and Telecommunications Commission. We have to formalize its role in children's digital protection by adding working groups focused on specifically on app compliance and interjurisdictional enforcement, as well as child rights standards. And critically, the structure can include provincial partners like Quebec's Consumer Protection Agency and civil society experts from digital rights, NGOs to Indigenous youth advocates that can provide different perspectives on the matter. And this approach is very feasible because it helps avoid duplication and makes better use of regulatory knowledge and provides a home for cross-cutting enforcement activities like app store monitoring and public guidance. And while this forum can't directly regulate platforms like Apple or Google, it can definitely issue public findings and shape voluntary compliance codes and apply soft enforcement pressure through regulatory coordination. And the final phase, and the phase that takes the longest, is the proposition of a new Children's Digital Protection Act. And this long-term legislation would consolidate and codify protections across advertising, privacy, and design. It's going to be our opportunity to lead globally, just like the UK and the EU have done. And this act would establish design standards that center a child's best interest, banning deceptive prompts and emotionally manipulative elements in games and apps used by children. And by phasing this in after foundational reforms that are already underway, that will sustain long-term protection. App developers and platforms may resist new requirements, but that's why it's very crucial to provide clear directions and implementation timelines throughout all three phases. So if we build industry consultation, and specifically in the second phase, that can also help reduce friction and improve adoption. And two more things to consider is that many app developers operate outside of Canada, and so enforcement won't necessarily be airtight. But enforcement doesn't need to be perfect to be successful or effective, because a few high-profile investigations can create a strong deterrent effect. Feasibility is very easy to achieve because most of these efforts already exist in one form or another. We just need to translate it to better target the deception that children experience through these games. For the first phase, the Competition Act already prohibits misleading representations in the marketplace, but it's based on what a reasonable person would understand. That standard simply doesn't work for kids, at least not yet. And so by amending the act to define deceptive digital marketing to children, we can help give regulators a familiar legal tool to address this harm immediately. Next is coordination. The Digital Regulators Forum already exists. All we need to do is expand its mandate to include children's digital well-being. This approach also avoids building a new agency from scratch, where we leverage what we already have and make it more child-focused. And lastly, the Children's Digital Protection Act. Yes, I know legislation takes time, but if we've already built momentum at that point through the enforcement and through the coordination from the first and second phases, with reference to efforts from other jurisdictions, we'll have a very strong foundation for public and political support. And by that point, the groundwork is already done. We'll have the clarity and confidence to legislate boldly and effectively. So this plan is rooted in real mechanisms, real precedent, and real partnerships. We're not reinventing the wheel here. We're just tuning it to finally steer in the direction of child safety. And so my main point here is that today's children deserve that digital playground free from deceptive practices. They're not just small users. They're not digital consumers in training. They're people who grow and learn and trust. And Canada has so much room to strengthen its approaches, and by learning from international examples, as well as building our work from the ground up, we can ensure that the games our children play are there for them to enjoy, and only to enjoy without undermining their rights or healthy development. Thank you.